Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
We're glad you joined us this evening. Would you take a moment, please, to click on the like button? That's this. Would you click on the subscribe button? That says subscribe. And would you click on the bell icon, which looks like a little bell? Those would help you stay connected to our broadcast and help us maybe get a little more attention. Probably not, but nevertheless, if you would do that, that would mean a lot to us. Thank you.
So, if you're new to this channel, each week, Todd and I take a moment to talk about the upcoming lectionary passages from the Gospels for the upcoming weekend. Our goal is to talk about those passages in the context of love and inclusion and social justice. Our hope is that our talking will be just talking, as in justice, but that also something we say as we go back and forth might inspire you along with us to do more than just talking. So, Todd, what passage are we looking at this week?
We are looking at Mark chapter 10, verses 2 through 16, and asking the question: is there anything we can learn about justice from the topic of divorce?
Yeah, so the Pharisees come to Jesus and it says to test him, and asks if it's lawful for a man to divorce his wife. And before we jump into that, um, that was a hotly debated topic among the Pharisees back then. So they're kind of drawing him into, like, they're not creating this out of thin air. This was already an ethical argument taking place within that community that they're wanting him to weigh in on.
Mm-hmm.
Which side do you take?
Right.
So
It would be like
interesting.
it would be like the abortion issue or
Right.
LGBT issue and some of those hot topic issues within Christianity today that are dividing denominations. This would be, yeah, one of those questions that was dividing the Pharisees.
That's right. That's right. And before we say too much, well, first of all, I've never been divorced, so I really am kind of talking out of my ear this week. If you're listening to this and you have been divorced, you know way more on the topic already than I do. We can talk about the text and the textual criticism here a little bit, but I just want to say from the beginning that anything that I say about divorce is theoretical and could be dead wrong. So just want to hold that with an open hand as we discuss that this week. I've seen
Yeah,
my
and
parents. I come from divorced families. My mom's been married multiple times. My dad's been married multiple times and divorced. Um, so I mean, I've experienced it as a kid, but I've never experienced it as a partner or a spouse.
yeah, and I think that's probably and yeah, where you and I are both coming from is yeah, recognizing it both from where we've seen it not touch our marriages themselves, but seen it touch families connected to us. In your case, you had it with your parents. I did not have that with my parents. My parents were married until my dad passed away.
Mm.
But I've had other family members, both in my family and through my wife's side of the family that have been through divorce, and so I've seen some of the effects. But yeah, I certainly can't speak to it firsthand. So I looking at this as more from a little bit of an outsider for sure.
Hmm. Hmm. And I can say that this passage specifically, I've seen this passage used by pastors to convince women to stay with their husbands, and maybe the other way around. I'm sure that exists. I'm just saying what I've witnessed has mostly been, only been pastors using this passage against women to keep them in relationships that were not healthy, marriages that were not safe. Just saying that Jesus forbids divorce. Done. It's a very shallow, uninformed way of, I think, interpreting this text. You just a surface reading where you just say Jesus says there's no exceptions. It says it right here in Mark 10. Boom. Therefore, divorce is taboo. You got to stick it out. You made your
Yep.
commitment. You got to stick with it. And for for generations, that's what Christian marriage partners were told.
Right. And this is what we're going to get into tonight is just one of the fundamental errors that pastors and religious leaders have made again and again with the scriptures is too often they read the scriptures in an English translation or whatever language translation is common to them, and they read it as if it is written in the culture and context of the time in which they're living, and they're not taking any time or figuring out the context and the historical realities of when the text was originally written. And so pastors, religious leaders have counseled women acting like Jesus gave this advice in in the 1970s
Right. In our
and
context.
in our context, and Jesus did not. And that's what Herb does in his writing this week, and what we're going to get into is you've really got to understand the historical context to understand where Jesus is coming from, and then only then can you possibly maybe derive any kind of principle from it that can then be looked forward to today.
Yeah, that's a great segue, Todd. So, one of the passages that was being argued over by the different schools of the Pharisees back then was Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 4. And I'm not going to take the time to read it tonight, but basically it just says that a man could divorce a woman for any reason whatsoever. I know some fundamentalist sectors of Christianity make it, and we'll talk about this in a minute, make an exception for that divorce is only allowable in the situation of infidelity. But if you go back to the Torah, there's some things we need to understand. Number one, they were not at this time in Israel's history strict monogamists. There was polygamy that was practiced. So men had at times more than one wife. It was heterosexist in the sense that it was um, opposites, marriages of the opposite sex or opposite genders, or I don't want to imply a binary there. So just man and woman, that was the bias of marriage in the Torah, but not man and one woman. It was one man and could be multiple women, right?
And not one woman and multiple men. There was only one
No, there was
direction.
no egalitarianism there. It was deeply patriarchal. And there was an economic component to it as well. The woman in that culture, for her to survive economically, she had to be connected to a man in some way, either father, brother, or husband, right? And so, but here we come into the Torah, and the Torah says that if one of your wives displeases you, or he says find something indecent about her, which I want to
Mm,
comment on that in a minute. If she just becomes like she could burn your toast for crying out loud.
right.
You could just get upset, give her a certificate of divorce, and send her away, and she's no longer your wife, and she can remarry. The first husband can never marry her again, but she can go from husband to husband to husband until she finds someone that isn't displeased. But this what jumps out at me is the indecent. Find something
Mm-hmm.
indecent about her. Historically, how many times have women been accused of being indecent? That is never a charge. Theoretically, it could be. I've never witnessed it. Never a charge raised against men. Never do
No,
we say men are indecent. We
no.
always say,
Boys will be boys.
right, exactly, exactly. Or locker room talk. We
Right.
heard that,
Yes.
a few years ago. So, I mean, So there's deeply patriarchal, deeply heterosexist. There's an economic component, and Deuteronomy says, for any reason whatsoever. And that's what the debate was among the school of the Pharisees. The
Mhm.
school of Hillel, which this is ironic, the school of Hillel, which taught that all the Torah could be summed up in treating your neighbor as yourself, or doing to others what you would have them do to you, rather. Um, that is the Pharisaical school that most of Jesus's teachings actually align with. But he takes
Mhm.
a hard right on this one. Hillel subscribed to the traditional view that a man could divorce his woman for his wife for any reason whatsoever. And the Pharisees of the school of Shammai said no, only if there's been infidelity can a man divorce his wife. And I think there was a justice component there. They were concerned for the
Mhm.
economic hardships that women would be put in if they were just divorced willy-nilly for any reason.
Mhm.
Jesus takes an even harder stance than both schools in Mark. In Mark's response, which is what we're looking at this week in Mark 10, Jesus says no divorce, period, no exceptions, no divorce. And I think that's because of his concern for what divorce did to women in that patriarchal culture. But Matthew has a little softer version of Jesus on this. This story in Matthew sides with the school of Shammai and says, no, you can divorce, but only for infidelity. So he sides with Shammai there, which is a rare. There's only a few instances where Jesus ever sides with the Shammai Pharisees and the debates. Most of the time, he sides with the Hillelians. But
Mhm.
on this one, he either in Matthew sides with Shammai in protection of women, or he um,
Well, and
comes down
frankly, it's
either
because the
end.
reason why he changes sides is it seems like for whatever reason, Hillel is inconsistent on this point, and Shammai is inconsistent. It seems like Jesus seems to be being pretty consistent in justice in the synoptics. Jesus seems to be pretty consistent on a justice mindset, an attack with where he's going. And it's like Hillel misses it in one of these rare cases where Hillel generally is a pretty just tradition. It's just
The
Jesus is a little,
Hillelians won out in the end. They were the more
right,
loving, interpreting Torah as love.
right.
Maybe not always justice, but it's ironic. The only other area that Jesus disagrees with the Hillelians on is the prosbul. Hillel said that if the year of Jubilee is coming up and there's a debt that is about to be canceled,
Mm,
that you could declare it prosbul and it would be exempt or immune to the year of Jubilee. And so Jesus, that's the only other instance in which Jesus departs from Hillel. And he
mm,
says, nope, nope, all debts forgiven, period. All debts
yeah,
forgiven. It's about eliminating poverty, economic justice for those in debt, all slaves set free, all land returned to original owner, all debts forgiven, no prosbul. So only
yeah.
here and there does Jesus side with Shammai.
It's very
And you're right, it's
interesting.
because of the consistency of justice.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we have to be really clear about why what women were facing. I mean, they were facing, and correct me or expand my knowledge if I'm oversimplifying this, but if a woman does not have a father, a brother, or a husband taking care of her in this time and place, except in rare situations where maybe somehow a woman was able to carve out some kind of industrious career for herself, oftentimes it ended up being she would either be a beggar or she would be a sex worker.
Correct.
And those would be really her own only two options of providing for herself unless she found somebody else to provide for her. And oftentimes in a second or third marriage situation, generally you are also not getting the cream of the crop in the husband selection either. Husbands are typically not chomping at the bit to take somebody who's been married a couple times. And so the ones who would are probably not the most upstanding of individuals either. And so you're the woman is becoming, because she's been divorced once or more, is getting into a very perilous place economically, and her own personal safety.
Mhm.
Uh,
And
and
I want to say too, I just want to clarify once again, this is looking at it through the lens of that time and that place and how divorce was practiced in that culture. There is by no means any implication that today someone who has been married or divorced multiple times is in any form less
no,
than in their worth. But
correct.
in that purity culture of that time, they were viewed as less than in their worth.
And so it was a very realistic, gracious, just posture for Jesus to be very strict
Mhm.
on divorce when there was
When
nothing,
divorce ruined women's lives.
when divorce ruined women's lives and the whole legal structure was set with no protections for them. So this was what he could offer in that setting to be the most protective, just, gracious thing to women with what he had to work with at the time. Um,
Absolutely.
and so that's what you have to say is, okay, so so is Jesus then saying now it's not right to get divorced? Well, I think we would start, and I forgive me, I'm probably
No,
jumping
go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
subtly ahead, slightly ahead, is Jesus would want to take the most just action possible within
Absolutely.
today's structure, and where necessary, perhaps the structure still needs to be adjusted and changed. That would be the principle that we would want to take from this and draw forward, not don't ever get divorced, but what is the most just way to handle a divorce situation where both parties can find a way forward on the other side of divorce.
Correct. Correct. And just a little bit of background too, just to flesh out the entire context. Um, Israel or yeah, Israel didn't start digressing, or the Judeans. They didn't start the Jewish people, the Hebrews. Um, they didn't start transitioning out of um, polygamy and into strict monogamy. That transition didn't start until they were returning from Babylonian exile, according
Mm,
to Jewish historic sources. Um, it was further ingrained through their occupation by Greece and their occupation by Rome. Um, Both Rome and Greece socially practiced marital monogamy. In Rome and Greece, both sexual monogamy was a personal, private matter, but marital monogamy, was only one spouse.
mhm,
Um, the interesting thing about Rome too, and this is and if someone's careful with this text in Mark, they'll say, well, how can you say that only men were allowed to divorce their wives? Because it says, or if the woman, if
mhm,
she divorces her husband. Well, Josephus tells us that Rome did practice egalitarian divorce in the sense that men could divorce women and women could divorce men. But the Jewish people still did not at that time. When he tells the story of Salome and her leaving her husband to be married to another, he says that she is a political figure, right? So she has Roman
mhm,
authority. She's a Roman citizen who's also a
mhm,
Jew. And he actually says, and this is from the works of Josephus, I've given you a reference in this week's article on my blog, but she says that though this was not according to the Jewish laws, she chose not to follow the law of her country, but the law of her authority, which means Roman versus Jewish, and so renounced her wedlock. So we know that by the time that Mark was being written, the Jesus community was becoming more diverse. It wasn't
Hmm.
just a Jewish community, and they were reaching out through Paul's and others' missionary activities into the larger Roman population. And so Mark includes, or if the woman too. But again, within Jewish law, only men could divorce their wives. It didn't go both ways. And so, yeah, this is a very unjust.
Hmm.
I think of here in the United States, women couldn't own a credit card or
That's right.
sign up, have a checking account, or sign a loan or a mortgage or buy a house. They couldn't do that till the 70s, right?
Right. Right.
And so a lot of people say, well, marriage just ain't what it used to be. People used to stay together. Well, women didn't have another option,
That's right.
before. I'm saying? It wasn't like they were in love. They just,
Right.
for their own survival, they stuck with some pretty unhealthy situations
Right.
just as they exist.
Yeah.
Um, you know what I mean? And so that's what we're again, that, and you've said it and I've said it now, and now I think we're repeating ourselves. This is what Jesus is dealing with in that context. Divorce as we know it in our culture today is not the way divorce was practiced in Jesus's culture at
Correct.
that time. And so when he says no divorce whatsoever, divorce as we practice it didn't exist. And
Right.
divorce as they practiced it, I would be opposed to practicing it that way today too.
That's right.
You know what I mean? If it was practiced that
Absolutely.
way, I'd say that's harmful.
Absolutely. So, a couple things I want to point out. The the example within the historical timeline of when the Bible was written, the most just expression and the best example of marriage that today's Christians would respect
Okay.
did not come from Judaism or Christianity. It came from polytheistic Greece and Rome. I just want to point that out.
Yeah.
That's where we got the best examples, the most egalitarian of that time of Earth's history. That's where we got the best examples, the most egalitarian one woman, one man, at least in the marital relationship uh, idea. That's so. Let's talk about. It's not the Bible that gave us the best example of that. It's Rome with some help from Greece. That's
Yeah.
that's
And
quite
Babylon.
telling. And Babylon.
Babylon gave us monogamy.
Thank you, Babylon. So we have that.
But to any of our listeners who are polyamorous, I just want to say, whenever you're critiqued by Bible believing Christians, I don't know what that term even means. That's just a phrase that's thrown around. But
Right.
biblical marriage, there is no one kind of biblical marriage in the
Right.
Bible. And so when anybody tries to tell you that monogamy is the only biblical form of marriage, well, first of all, it's just not true. And
Right.
even the Bible wouldn't have drifted into monogamy if it hadn't been influenced by these outside
Right.
influences. By the
And
time Paul preaches monogamy, he is definitely well entrenched within the Roman monogamous legal structure.
that's exactly right. That's
So
exactly right. And I think, and so then, yes. So then, as we look today
let
at
me just say, I'm
oh,
not,
please,
for
please.
those of you who are monogamous and you're not polyamorous, and I just made you uncomfortable. Um, all I'm saying, all I'm saying is we need to be careful not to judge or try to control the way other people love. I myself am a monogamist, and I'm thankful for monogamy. I am not. I'm not. I Yeah, that's the best way for me to say it. I'm a monogamist, and that's what I subscribe to. That's what I feel most comfortable with. That's what I resonate with. That's how I love. And so the Bible isn't anti-monogamy either. It's just not as clean cut as we
This
would like
is,
it.
ladies and gentlemen, I just want to point out that Herb, because he grew up in a fundamentalist Christian context, does not know how to dance. But what you just saw was the closest thing you'll ever see to Herb dancing, because that man was dancing hard right there. Um, so I was going to
You
say,
know
which I
why the
feel,
church I grew up in didn't believe in premarital sex?
why?
Because it might lead to dancing.
That's exactly right. No, I mean dancing is the worst thing possible that could ever happen. Um, so I was just going to say, as we're talking about traditional and non-traditional forms of relationships today,
Hmm.
I was going to say that we would again take this forward and say, all right, how then the question is, how do you choose to live into those relationships in a just, equitable way?
That's the key. It's about justice. It's about equity. It's about the golden rule, treating others the way you would like to be treated. Those are the sexual ethics, not
That's
all this
that's
other
that's the
periphery
fundamental
stuff.
question
Because you can
because
be
you can.
polyamorous or you can be monogamous and still be unjust, unloving, harmful, death dealing.
Are you
You know what I
going for
mean?
the are you going for the bare minimum? Are you going for baseline? Are you going
Right.
for the full expression of love and justice in whatever relationship you are
Well
engaged
said.
in?
Well said.
That's that and that's where Jesus was going 2,000 years ago with this passage, and that's what we're trying to draw from
Whatever
today.
form of marriage or partnering or love that you subscribe to and practice, it should be rooted in justice, treating others the way that you would like to be treated, treating your neighbor as yourself. It should be rooted in all of those ethics of love and compassion.
Yeah. And so when we're talking about why we're grateful that divorce is a lot more accessible to people now, it doesn't mean that by default then um, we you and I are trying to cheapen or uh, lessen the value of engaging in relationships of fidelity. We are saying that the reality of all human experiences, with all our best motives and interests at heart, sometimes those relationships of fidelity don't work out. And there has to be a just, equitable way of those relationships being able to move on in apart from one another, and so that neither is harmed emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, or is harmed as little as possible, and economically as well. And that's what we're talking about with that either is again, it's not trying to, we, by coming to a place where it's where having the option of divorce is more accessible does not devalue the
That's right.
value of relationship. It's just saying that it is still very much, we are human beings, and we need to
We're
be able
fallible.
to, we are fallible, we and and sometimes even it's not that we're fallible. Sometimes the chemistry just does not work. It just
Or
doesn't
people
happen.
change.
People change sometimes, or yeah, there's so many. So let's let's help each other get fresh starts. Let's help protect everyone involved, including where it happens, the children, and protect them the best we can in that process as well.
Yeah, at its best, um, two consensual people can come to a place in their relationship where they just realize a mistake has been made and they can mutually agree that they're better off as friends and not as partners. And that's okay. At the same time, I'll return back to the story of my mother. Um, there's one marriage she had to an abusive narcissist that had she stayed with him, she probably wouldn't have lived to tell the story.
Yeah.
And so, are we to tell women in that situation or men in that situation, either one? Are we to tell people in abusive situations that that they have to stay in those because Jesus said in Mark 10, you can't have a divorce, that you can't do that, that it, oh, and so I think in at best that's silly to try to base the way we practice divorce in a much more just, much more egalitarian way today with a concern for all parties involved. It's silly to try to base divorce today on a form of divorce back then that was being written about that doesn't exist today. At worst, at best, it's silly. At worst, it can be lethal and dangerous.
Yes.
Women can lose their lives, and I'm being very serious about that.
Right.
This can be dangerous
Right.
to try to apply that to now. And what we need to do in all situations is choose what is the most life-giving option, not the most death. Even the institution of marriage, people were institutions were made for people, not people for the institutions.
That's right.
And when those institutions become death dealing, then it's time for a change because the goal is life, the goal is love, the goal is justice. And people that are in either have been divorced or are in the process of getting divorced, they don't need our judgment. They don't need our shame. What they need is our encouragement. They need our care. They need our support.
Yes.
So, yeah, I don't think we can base whether we practice divorce today on these passages. We can let these passages inform, how we practice divorce and make sure it's just, make sure it's,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It
It's
concerns
really
the
just saying
well-being.
be just in what you do. It's really what you can pull from this passage is be
That's all
just.
you can pull is Jesus said that the way divorce was being practiced was harmful to women in his society, and so therefore he was opposed to it.
Yep.
And so whenever things are harmful, even if marriage now becomes harmful to women in our society, we can be opposed to that too then.
Yep.
It doesn't matter. The issue is harm. Is harm being done
Yes.
versus that which is life-giving.
Okay. Well, that's good. Anything
Yeah.
else you have for us tonight?
I didn't write about it this week, but I would be amiss. I ran out of room, and I was actually disappointed that I ran out of room because I just love this last section in our reading this week where people were bringing children to Jesus to place his hands on him. And the disciples stop them. They become an obstruction.
Mm.
And Jesus becomes indignant and says, let the children come. Don't hinder them because the kingdom belongs to these kids.
Mm.
And again, regardless of what marginalized group we're talking about or discussing every week, within those marginalized groups, the marginalized of the marginalized, the vulnerable of the vulnerable is always the children of those groups.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, this new world that we're creating in love and in justice, it belongs especially to the vulnerable of the vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love that last section there. I love that last part. People try to come up with some romanticized version of children to say, well, what does Jesus mean that you have to become like a little child? It means you need to be in solidarity with
Right.
whoever is the most vulnerable and marginalized in your society. That's what
Yeah.
it means. It's
Yeah.
not romanticizing children. It's about
Yeah.
what's your social location. Are you living in solidarity? Are you practicing a preferential option for the marginalized? Or are you, just living in your privilege? But again, I just love that. The kingdom belongs to the vulnerable and especially the vulnerable of the vulnerable.
Yeah, I think I look at this passage and I these last few verses and I think of Fred Rogers, just because Um,
Great
the thing
example.
the thing about him, and for your and my generation, we grew up with him, and um, he the parents and the other adults who looked at Fred Rogers and how he behaved, uh, even outside of his program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, is he always behaved in a way that would be understandable and respectful to the mind of a child.
Mhm.
And so it always caught adults off guard. And yet, when they watched him with the children, they realized that when he was speaking to the children in such a respectful, honoring way, and honoring them as full human beings, and then no matter their racial, gender background, he or full cognitive abilities or had some disability, he engaged with them as full human beings. There was something that would speak to the heart of the adult and speak to the inner child of the adult and speak to the longing that we all have had in our child to be seen as full human beings, because there's
Love
all of
that.
us, even as adults, who wonder if we're being seen as full human beings.
Yeah.
And what we see in this moment with Jesus and what we saw modeled in the life and ministry of Fred Rogers was somebody who understood that if we don't see the full humanity of children, then we're going to miss the full humanity in everybody else.
Right.
And so you're right. This is so profound, and it's not about us having some kind of different faith experience to become like little children. It is that we always see the smallest and the weakest as the most human
Mm-hmm.
expression
Mm-hmm. I love that.
that's out there. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it, man. That's what I got this week.
That's pretty good, man.
You got
You do
anything
pretty
else?
good. No, that's it. Let me just say that if you're watching and you're not familiar with renewedheartministries.com, you should be, because if anything that Herb said tonight with his content, as you know, Herb is the one who really drives the content, and I'm more commentary. But Herb is the one who really digs his intellectual skills into bringing us content each week. And so you can go back and really flesh that out with the writing that he does each week on his blog or listening to his podcast. You find that all at Renewed Heart Ministries. If you don't want to subscribe to it through your podcast channels, or you can go to pathos.com or .org.
.com.
.com,
I feel
and you
like
can
it.
subscribe to his Social Jesus uh, blog there as well. But really, the easiest thing is to just get hooked up with everything at renewedheartministries.com. But there you can also find out about his books, his most recent one, Finding Jesus. And also there, if you're in the position to do so and believe in what Herb does, you can support Renewed Heart Ministries by donating on a one-time or regular basis.
It is pathos.com.
Pathos.com. Okay, very good.
Thank you,
So thank
Todd.
you for everybody who believes in the work that Herb does and the work of Renewed Heart Ministries. And we love having you all with us and digging into this stuff with us. It's a privilege for us to be with you. And
Thank you so much for watching each week.
yeah, we can't believe you do, and we're glad you do. And so we're having fun. Hope you are too. And we hope you have a great week. And we will see you again very soon.
Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for watching.